I asked in an email these questions, and I'll ask them again. Do they take you for granted where you work? Are you hardworking, loyal, the backbone of the office or the concern? But isn't someone else running off with the rewards? Someone with more flash than substance? At least that's how you see the matter. If so, you are what I'm going to call an Ajax, and your boss has a dilemma: how to keep you contented and on board. Maybe you're not an Ajax. Perhaps you have a reputation for bright ideas. The headhunters are after you, and you expect rewards to keep you from jumping ship. Loyalty, not in your vocabulary. Of course, you make twice as much as hardworking Ajax, and you deserve it. Ajax is easy to replace with another hardworking fellow, but you're not easy to replace. If you fit that description, then you're what I'm going to call an Odysseus. And you have just doubled your boss's dilemma: how to retain you without driving Ajax and all the other Ajaxes in the enterprise around the bend. I choose these names because they are the names of archetypes and very ancient myth of a competition between two soldiers in the Greek army outside Troy. And they represent a problem which is extremely difficult for any boss, whether it's in an army or an office or a bank. The problem is that the rewards system for Ajax and for Odysseus has to be different, and yet it has to be fair, or so it seems. It has to be different because Ajax and Odysseus actually do different kinds of work. Odysseus' job is to come up with ideas. Ajax's job is to do the hard work to bring them out into the marketplace or onto the battlefield. So they do different kinds of work, but that's not the end of the problem. Another reason why it's difficult to figure out fairness for these people is that when we reward Ajax, we are rewarding him for what he has done in the past, for what he has actually earned. When we reward Odysseus, we are rewarding him for something he hasn't done yet. We're paying him for the future. And that seems very odd because normally we think of equal pay for equal work. You pay people equally for what they deserve, for the work that they have done. But Odysseus expects to be paid for things he hasn't done yet, and in a successful enterprise he probably will be, because you need to retain Odysseus, and retention offers really are pay for the future. They are a kind of speculative investment. When the university decided, as apparently it has decided, to select a small percentage, I think about 10% of the faculty, and give them preemptive raises so they won't be headhunted by other universities, that is pay for the future. That is an investment in their research potential, which we want to keep here and which we don't want going elsewhere. So that's the problem. Put very simply, Ajax and Odysseus do different things, and they expect to be paid, one for the past and one for the future. Now, what I'm calling the dilemma, I wrote a book about this called the Ajax Dilemma. What I'm calling a dilemma is the problem of fairness. It appears, at least, that if you're fair to one, you're being unfair to the other. And we'll try in the next half hour or so to try to figure out how one might be fair between Ajax and Odysseus. If so, you would solve the fairness dilemma. But if you can't solve the dilemma, then you have to live with it. Either way, solving the dilemma or learning how to live with it requires the highest art in the art of leadership, I think. So we'll be talking about indirectly about the art of leadership, but through this specific example. Now the archetypes, Ajax and Odysseus, come from a story. You won't find it in Homer. It's reported to us in various different sources, and it's represented in vase paintings. It was a very large part of the ancient Greek imagination of their distant past. Now you have to imagine, we're in the army on the plain outside Troy. We have been fighting there for 9 years. It's 1 year longer than the war Johnny and I were in Vietnam. Been fighting this war for 9 years, and we're not making any significant progress. Sound familiar? There have been a lot of wars we've fought a long, long time and not made any significant progress. And often that's because we haven't figured out what it might take to win it. We thought the war in Vietnam was a war of attrition, which it wasn't. That was a mistake. It was something else. It was a war for hearts and minds. It was a war for providing an umbrella of security under which Vietnam could develop its democratic potential. But we went, I think, the wrong direction there. The Greeks outside Troy have been fighting a war of attrition. They have been killing plenty of Trojans, and the Trojans have been killing plenty of Greeks, and both sides have resources, pools of men who keep flooding in on both into Troy from the Anatolian heartland and into the Greek army from Greece, all looking for glory and medals and various other kinds of excitement. So it just goes on and on, 9 years. And now the greatest soldier, the most famous soldier in the Greek army, Achilles, has died. He was blessed with a protection for most of his skin, as you probably know. According to one myth, he was dipped in the river that gave him protection. But his mama had to hold him by the heel, and so his heel was vulnerable. He had an Achilles heel. In any case, Achilles is dead. And his armor has been left to the best soldier in the Greek army. This then becomes a kind of most valuable player award. Who is the MVP in the army? And this is a very special suit of armor. This was made by a god, Hephaestus, out of precious metals and brilliantly decorated with works of art, absolutely irreplaceable. It's worth far more than you could realize by melting it down. It is a work of art, and it carries the imprint of the gods, and it was the armor of Achilles. This is a very special thing. And a matter of no importance, really, it's too small for Ajax, who's a big lummox. Ajax is so big that when he's out there with his shield, at least 4 men can take shelter behind him in a battle, and they often do. He's like a human tank. He is absolutely loyal to the core. He has been, wherever the fighting was the stiffest, he has saved the life of Odysseus on one occasion. He saved the life of the general, Agamemnon. He has been, in a conventional way, certainly after Achilles, the most valuable infantryman. A paradigm of all the soldier virtues. Brave, loyal, hardworking, steadfast, always there for his friends. And they have been taking him for granted for 9 years. The armor is too big for Odysseus. Odysseus' strength is in his mind, his words. He is a brilliant speaker, a brilliant strategist. He is, in the Greek expression, polytropos, many-turning, wily Odysseus, always comes up with a plan for survival, usually his survival. He's already snuck into Troy and stolen a sacred treasure from Troy, and he can come up with all sorts of clever schemes, apparently, that have helped him out over the years. But he's tricky. He is a kind of a trickster hero. And the two men, Ajax and Odysseus, represent what to the Greeks was an important divide between the value of words and ideas and the value of actions, on the other hand. Of course, ideas are no good if they're not put into action, and actions are no good if they're not guided by strategy. So they recognize, we all recognize, you need both words and action. Nevertheless, there is a constant debate about the relative importance of ideas and doing things. You know, we're an idea factory at UT, and sometimes we have to defend that. So these are the two leading contenders for the most valuable player award, Ajax and Odysseus. The general, Agamemnon, who's king in Mycenae, where the Lion Gate rises over the entrance. Some of you may have been there. Agamemnon, king in Mycenae, commanding general of this army, does what was normal, I think, in Greek society when a decision of this kind had to be made. He convenes a panel of judges chosen by lot from the army. That's probably the way he did it. This is something that Greeks tended to do, a little bit like a modern jury. And he said that he proclaimed that they would make the decision, and he gave the two contenders, Ajax and Odysseus, equal time to make the case that they were the most valuable players. Equal time, you wonder, well, how 2,000 years ago did they measure, well, 3,000 years ago, really, did they measure equal time? They had water clocks. The water would drip out at a steady rate. They could make sure that each of these people had exactly the same amount of time. So this couldn't be more fair, right? You know, panel chosen by lot, probably the day of the event, so not very easy to tamper with them. Equal time to present your case. What could be fairer than that? Well, keep in mind, one of these guys is a master of words. The other, a master of action. And Ajax was famously a man of few words, blunt, simple, straight to the heart. I can imagine what happened. You know, Ajax would get up and he'd say, I don't need all that time on the water clock. You know, Johnny, I saved your life out there. You know, and yours. I was there when you were in trouble. And he sits down. And Odysseus gets up and gives this brilliant speech. And you can see that this man, although he's not yet divulged his plan for the Trojan horse, this is the guy who can win the war. And there's another tradition, actually, according to which the decision was made in a different way. They convened a panel of prisoners of war from Troy and said, which one of these guys scares you more? Well, when Ajax is right on top of us, he's a lot scarier because he's as big as 4 normal men. But we can see him coming. With Odysseus, we never know. And he's the one who really terrifies us. Ajax kind of war is never going to defeat us. We've been fighting 9 years. Ajax is great in a war of attrition, but he's not going to be the one who changes the war into a different kind of war in which the Greeks might win, and Odysseus might do that. So, not surprisingly, Odysseus wins the armor. What then? Ajax suddenly realizes, and this is something you may have experienced in a 360 type evaluation. Ajax suddenly realizes that his peers don't value him as highly as he thought they did. Of course, they applaud his courage, his loyalty, and all the other good qualities that he has, but they realize that there is somebody more valuable than he. And he is terribly, terribly upset. He becomes very angry. He loses it, in fact. This is probably he's suffering from post-traumatic stress, like all of us vets, and becomes rather, not all of us vets, he becomes dangerous, unlike Johnny and me. Unlike Johnny and me. He becomes dangerous, and he sets out to kill Agamemnon, and Odysseus for that matter, and he's thwarted in that by a goddess. We don't need to go into the details there. But the story is a very sad one, because Ajax eventually, by attempting to kill his commander, he destroys the position he has in the army, and he will destroy himself. He will commit suicide later on. Of course, this is an extreme example of Ajax behavior. And I thought, when I first made this story's acquaintance, I thought the problem in this story is that Ajax is just crazy. He gets angry too easily. And when he gets angry, his anger is outsized, just like his body. It's too big. And yeah, he's kind of a bad loser. And yes, his anger is over the top. But the more I thought about it and reflected on my own experience in management, I have been managing various offices in the university for 24 years and run into my share of Ajaxes and Odysseus's, for that matter. You might know Odysseus as a prima donna. Do you have prima donnas in your world? So I had some experience of this, and I began to think about it, and I realized, no, wait a minute. Ajax, of course he's angry. Ajax is always angry when he realizes that his hard work and loyalty are not being rewarded as much as as the promise of somebody who is flashier than he is. So in a department, the hard-working instructor who teaches hundreds of students every semester is given a pittance, and the brilliant research professor can get away with hardly any teaching and earn 3 times or 4 times the salary. And so on. You can tell your own stories from your own world that are like this. Everywhere I look, there are Ajaxes and Odysseus's, and the Ajaxes put up with it. They don't have much choice, but they often get angry. And what do you do when you're an angry Ajax? You continue to work, probably. At the simplest level, you may commit sort of minor sabotage. You might spit in the soup or whatever it is that you have an opportunity to spit in behind people's back, behind the employer's backs. Small ways you may sabotage the enterprise, or bigger ways than that. Self-destructive, destructive of the enterprise, you may do quite a lot of damage. Your morale is, of course, sunk as a result of this discovery that you're not being valued for what you are. So it's not that Ajax is too emotional. Yes, this is outsized. It's a myth, after all. Everything is bigger than normal in a myth. But it's a very real problem that people have, and one that I think we're familiar with in our own world. So I decided it's wrong to blame Ajax. What we need to do is to try to look at some way that we can handle an Ajax and Odysseus situation without this kind of violent and dangerous outcome. Or even without the minor inconvenience of having somebody spit in the soup behind your back. So how can you fix this? Go back and rewrite the story. What could you do differently? Well, the first suggestion that a lot of people make is what you do when your kids are quarreling over a toy. You might make them take turns, or you might make sure that they, if one girl has a doll, you make sure the other girl has a doll too. If one kid gets a gold star for showing up, you give a gold star to the other kid. Everybody gets the same reward. So some people say, well, why don't you just split up the armor in you make two piles. You put the greaves here and the breastplate and the helmet and the shield over there, and you let them choose. That sounds okay, and maybe in some cases it might work. But it's not going to work. It's not going to solve the boss's problem for two reasons. In the long run, it will not solve any problem. First of all, you are going to have to keep Odysseus. It's much more important that you keep him than that you keep Ajax. Ajax, he may do the work of 4 men, but you can hire 4 men. There's nobody you can hire that you know of who can do exactly what Odysseus is going to do for you, you think. So you've got to consider the value of Odysseus as enormously more to you than that of Ajax. So the even split isn't going to work. But there's another reason it won't work, and that is that Ajax won't let it work. Ajax, after 9 years of hard work, blood, sweat, tears, always being where he's needed, Ajax knows he's number one. And there's only one number one. So maybe you can think of some way of giving equal rewards, but as corporate people point out to me, there's only one corner office. In a department, there's usually one guy who has the top salary. And and I've heard this happen, suppose you give equal salaries to 2 people who are related roughly as Ajax and Odysseus. The Odysseus is going to be furious because he knows he's better. It's not going to solve the problem, right, that you have, which is that both of these guys think that they're better and that it's going to take more to keep Odysseus with you, and he's the one you have to keep. So the even split concept is a non-starter, so don't even think about that. The second way to make it more fair is this. Fairness, we believe, is generally given by equality. And we've just seen that equality between Ajax and Odysseus isn't going to work. So what do you do when you can't achieve equality for one reason or another? Well, you might agree in advance on what procedure you're going to use in order to make the unequal distribution. So if Ajax and Odysseus had both signed on to the method Agamemnon used to make a decision before the decision was made, then you'd think you could go to Ajax afterward and said, you agreed to this. Why are you upset? Trust me, Ajax is still upset. I've been there, right? The agreement by itself doesn't work. But you might think we really need to change the nature of the decision procedure. That contest of speeches is already given to Odysseus because he's the speaker of the two. If you made it a tug of war, Ajax would win. Suppose instead of making it a contest of speeches or a tug of war, you made it something like a body count. For the next week, we're going to count up the number of number of Trojans that you kill or whose deaths you cause indirectly, and the guy with the most kills is going to win the prize. The problem with that is that, as I pointed out at the beginning, this war isn't about attrition. Very often body count type measures of success in business or education or anywhere else deflect our minds from what it is that we're actually judging, from our actual goals. If the goal is victory, and victory is defined in a different way, then the body count is irrelevant. If the goal is education and test scores don't measure education, then test scores deflect us from education, and so on. You can think of many ways in which body count type measures deflect us from our real goals, cause us to move in directions that we don't really want to move in. So it's hard to imagine what the contest would be that would be entirely fair about Ajax and Odysseus. And there actually, I think, is a reason why there's a difficulty in coming up with the concept of a fair contest. And that is that what is at issue here is actually values. Right? Winning a speech contest, winning a tug of war, winning a body count contest, none of those actually settle the value issue, which is at the bottom of this problem. Who is the most valuable player? What is value? And Ajax, of course, stands for very important values: courage, bravery, loyalty, hard work. Odysseus stands for different kinds of values: guile, deception, strategy. A decision between different families of values can't be made so easily. Somebody really has to think about what the values are. And in fact, whatever method he uses, Agamemnon is going to tilt the decision one way or another by choosing the method he chooses. You choose the tug of war, you're tilting it to Ajax. Choose the panel with the speeches, you tilt the decision towards Odysseus. Whatever Agamemnon does reflects on his values. The values of the commander, the values of the boss, the values of the leader are evident in the way that he or she handles the situation. Differences in value infect the problem even deeper than that. Let me show you why I say that. There's a standard way of thinking about inequality that was popularized by John Rawls, the political philosopher, but is, I think, really older than Rawls. And that is this, that generally we ought to try everywhere we can for equality, but where we can't, we should accept inequality only when it benefits the least advantaged party in the deal. So now we go to, let's suppose we try to apply this, which is called the difference principle. We try to apply the difference principle to Ajax and Odysseus. And here's the calculation. It's pretty simple. If we keep Odysseus on board, he's going to come up, let's suppose we're a bank now, or a financial institution. He's going to come up with a Trojan horse investment vehicle, which is going to be a terrific winner and will clean the clock of the Bank of Troy. If, on the other hand, we don't give him these rewards, he's going to defect to the Bank of Troy, and who knows what he's going to do to us. So we better keep him. If we keep him and we clean up as we expect to do, then there's going to be a lot of booty. You know, if you conquer Troy, there's gold and jewels and lots of other precious things that you can divide among the winning army. there's an equivalent to booty in the corporate world. You can probably tell me a lot more about it than I could tell you. But when there's various kinds of business success, including public IPOs and so on, there can be quite a lot of booty to share, and you want to be one of those who shares in it. In the case of Ajax and Odysseus, when and if Troy falls, then Ajax will get a substantial share of the booty. In fact, by any reasonable measure, his winnings when Troy falls are going to be considerably more valuable than that suit of armor, which can't be melted and can't be worn. It's really just a souvenir. Ajax would be rich for life. Right. A multimillionaire. If, on the other hand, we lose Odysseus and continue indefinitely with this war of attrition until we just get tired and go home, as we did as Johnny and I and our colleagues did in Vietnam, then there's going to be no booty for anyone. Ajax will have spent years of his life, risked death many times for nothing. Right. So obviously, the inequality that it takes to keep Odysseus on the team is to the advantage of Ajax. You're going to tell that to Ajax. Listen, Ajax, you're going to make a lot more money if we give the armor to Odysseus. Do you think Ajax is really in this for the money? Probably not. I mean, it's certainly not in the case of the mythical story. He's in it for honor. Odysseus may be in it for money. The problem with applying the difference principle to Ajax and Odysseus is simply this, that one of them cares about money, and the other cares about different values, about honor, about exhibiting courage and loyalty and being rewarded for those values which he exemplifies in his life. And when, as department chairman, I first encountered this kind of problem, I discovered very soon that when I was a young chairman, felt I'd been fed to the lions. I was a very young chairman. I discovered that my older colleagues, when they didn't get raises, weren't upset because they wanted more money. They were upset because they wanted the value of their kind of work to be recognized, and they felt it was not recognized. They were angry about that. It's not that they didn't care about justice. They wanted a just distribution of honor. So the problem with thinking about equality and inequality is that the units in which you're measuring equality may differ for the different people. They want different things. They have different values. They both want to be number one, but for Odysseus, it's, let's say, money, and for Ajax, it's honor and respect. So there are different kinds of inequality: inequality in wealth, inequality in respect, inequality in honor. And these we need to think about when we're trying to create a satisfactory working team. So far, I've not found any method that will achieve fairness in this case. We can't do an equal split. We can't develop a contest which would be recognized as fair by both parties. We can't apply the difference principle because they have fundamentally different values. It looks as if no solution to the Ajax dilemma exhibits fairness. So if that's right, then the dilemma really is a dilemma. There's not a solution to the fairness problem with which I began. Now, you may feel at this point that I really have cheated you. I mean, you came here, some of you all the way from A&M, to learn what to do about reward systems, and I'm telling you, nothing works. Well, actually, but I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you quite there. Where I am leaving you, where I'm stopping for just a moment, is on this point that what's impossible is a solution based on principles of fairness, equality, agreement, transparency, various other features of fairness, all of which are very, very good, but they're not going to solve this problem. I say in my book on this that there is a fairness zone, which is substantial. Equal pay for equal work. When the work is equal, then the pay ought to be equal. When it's clear how to distribute things equally, then of course that's what we expect and that's what we want. The point of this kind of example is, as I learned the hard way in my years of academic management, fairness can't be applied in every case, and it doesn't exhaust what it is that people actually want. I can illustrate the point from a different direction. Generally, according to empirical studies, employees rate their management higher on the scale of justice when they rate their management higher on the scale of compassion. Compassion is inherently unfair. Right? The compassionate boss does not treat everybody the same. Okay, so you come in late every morning. I'm going to fire you. You come in late every morning, but I know why, right? You come in late every morning for a week because your mother just got put in a nursing home and you have to stop off on the way to whatever it is. Even though we don't have a rule that allows for that, I'm obviously going to make an exception for that. I'm a compassionate boss. And the point is that employees generally regard the compassionate boss as more just than the one who is not compassionate. But the not compassionate boss will justify his lack of compassion on grounds of fairness. I'm going to treat everybody the same way by the same rules. These are the rules, we're going to follow them. So you know what I'm talking about. So from two different directions, one coming at this from thoughts about the relationship between compassion and fairness, and the other from the Ajax Dilemma and fairness, I conclude that fairness just isn't enough. We need more than fairness. We need justice. And I think justice goes beyond fairness and sometimes compromises fairness. Aristotle, in his famous book on justice, within his book on ethics, wrote that justice is, first of all, equality. If you can't manage equality, you manage proportional equality. Equal pay, all right, well, you do different amounts of work, then proportionally, the two proportions should be equal. Your work divided by your pay ought to equal my work divided by my pay. But then at the end he says, but even that isn't enough, because just following the rules doesn't lead to justice. You need to look at what it was that the rule maker was trying to accomplish. And Aristotle has a name for that. In Greek, it's epieikeia. I'm not trying to teach you Greek. I think the best translation for it is fittingness. That is, the just manager, the just boss, doesn't simply apply the rules. He applies them in a fitting way, and when it fits the situation, varies the rules compassionately, or with an eye to successful business, as in the Ajax case. So justice and fairness, if I'm right, are not the same, and justice is more important than fairness. The fairness dilemma can't be solved, but we have to live with it if we can't solve it. And as I said earlier, living with a problem like this does require a very high level of the art of leadership. Justice isn't easy. If justice is not fairness, then it is not simply applying a formula or an algorithm to a situation. A wise leader will achieve success with his or her team by achieving some level of justice that is acceptable to all parties. So we can go back to the beginning of the story with Ajax and Odysseus, and the beginning has to be even before the war starts. Agamemnon, from the early days of the war, has exhibited himself as an untrustworthy commander. He's not a leader. He's got power, but people don't trust him. So from the very beginning, to make this story come out better, we would need a commander who is trusted and therefore functions more as a leader than simply as a high-ranking person. Trust, absolutely essential. Second, had Agamemnon wanted to head off problems of this kind and keep the team together, he would have been developing from the very beginning shared values in the team. So there would be a kind of culture in the team that didn't allow for a knockdown, drag-out competition between words and action, between strategy and loyalty. You know, there's no, on a winning football team, you all probably know more about football than I do since I'm not from Texas. But on a winning football team, there really isn't a competition between the quarterback and the offensive line, right? They need each other, right? And they know they need each other. One of them is going to get the fame and the big salary, but they have to appreciate each other. And if that breaks down, you know, if the offensive line decides they don't care about protecting the quarterback, everything goes to pieces. You need Ajax, and you need Odysseus. They both need each other, and because they need each other, they need, above all, to understand why they need each other. And this is something that Agamemnon has palpably failed to do. Because when Ajax, confident of winning the prize, learns that he's lost it and goes home in anger and what he thinks of as disgrace and dishonor, that's because no one has explained to him in a convincing way why it is that Odysseus is valuable to the army. He simply cannot appreciate the kind of work that Odysseus does. And that's understandable. It would take a lot of persuasion. It would have taken, I should say, a lot of persuasion for me and Johnny in the field to have come to believe that the fat colonels back at Pentagon East in Saigon playing golf with their Vietnamese caddies were more worthwhile than we were. And we knew they were getting more medals and other perks. A little footnote of Ajax-type anger there, you know. You know, you never like the rear echelon. What is the expression that they use in Iraq? I won't repeat it. But obviously, in a team with good morale, you know what the rear echelon is doing and why they're doing it, and you know you depend on them for the supplies and the ammunition and everything else on which you depend. So, had Agamemnon wished to head off this problem, he would have needed to establish trust in his leadership right from the beginning, so nobody would believe he was playing favorites. And he would have needed to develop from the beginning a culture in the team of shared values and shared appreciation. And there are obviously ways you can do that. I don't have an algorithm for it. It depends on the kind of work you're doing. And it can be very difficult. Both trust and team building depend on communication. Agamemnon was not a good speaker. Worse than that, he was not a good listener. Listening is, I think, the most important part of communication. You can't communicate to somebody if you don't know what he's thinking. You don't know what he's thinking unless you can listen. Hearing what people are saying is the beginning of communication. Agamemnon was a terrible listener right from the beginning. And of course, he would need to explain what the mission was. He would need to explain to the troops why attrition was not going to win the war. And he would need to explain to them that their success will depend ultimately on qualities for which most of them have not been trained. You know, the infantrymen are not trained in guile and stratagem. And yet, that's what their success will require. In Iraq, the infantrymen were not trained to deal with the local cultures and provide a sense of security for local villages, but that's what the situation required. Communication, difficult, essential to any kind of leadership. So that's the situation about rewards. Rewards are an essential part of any operation. People expect them. They want to be recognized for what they do and for what they are. And you, as leader, manager, boss, commander, whatever you are, need to find some way of making sure that everyone on the team does feel recognized for his particular contribution. Easy or easier, it's not easy anywhere, easier in a small group, harder in a big one. It's not surprising that in very large organizations there tend to be algorithms for raises and promotions, so that the system is absolutely transparent and seems fair to everybody, which is one reason why the large organizations that operate this way are going to get passed by the smaller ones that are able to recruit and keep Odysseus. So in living with the Ajax Dilemma, the dilemma of fairness and rewards, keep in mind trust, team culture, and communication. Thank you very much. We have plenty of time. I wanted to leave plenty of time for discussion because my experience is people have ideas about this.
Just a reminder, please step up and use the microphone.
Yeah, there are mics in both aisles. Not you. Not too much. No, go ahead.
To an Ajax.
Yeah.
I just, one thing that crossed my mind, something I've thought about. I'm Gary Hoover, and I was the entrepreneur in residence at McCombs at the Caliber Center a few years ago. Is one of the things that when I observe business that I don't know that people talk about much, and I'm not sure the management professors need to talk to me about it, but a key thing is I call in my head the division of the spoils. And so when you find a savings or some big benefit, you get some in a sense, something extra, where you say, oh, we were going to make 6 million last year, and now we're going to make 8, or whatever. Are you with me? Then, to me, a key decision in management is how you divide that among the stockholders, the workers, the management and labor, potentially separately, and the customers, which you can break into things to attract customers, like spend more on advertising, or you can give them a break in price. But I'm not sure how many managers really think that way in terms of how do you, because if you stay like John Mackey in Conscious Capitalism, he's really focused, okay, I got all these interests I got to serve, and I got to balance this kind of issues you're talking about. But they go beyond just people working for you, And so I don't know, just thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I started on this project because I had been working on the play by Sophocles about Ajax, and I began to think that the standard view that Ajax was just over-the-top angry was wrong. And I had lunch with a young friend who started a successful business and had extra money to give out in bonuses, and he was wrestling with the decision. Does he give it to his design person who is being headhunted, or does he give it to his marketing person? I mean, who gets the bigger bonus? And it's not the amount of money, it's the which one is bigger, right? They all want money, but they mostly want to get the one that's bigger, or so it appears. So I thought, this is really important. I need to think about this because of my own experience with this sort of problem again and again in my own world. I don't think the academic world is all that different. We have prima donnas, too.
Leslie Dean Jones, Classics. Taking up from your very last remark, I think there is a way in which the academic world is quite different from business, and I just wonder if you could fill something out. With this difference principle, the argument was that in the long run, Odysseus will win rewards that Ajax can share in. It's not clear that that is the case in academia. The people that publish a lot are getting these retention raises, but that it doesn't pan out into extra rewards for everybody else. It's an individual reward. And other people in the department who are keeping the department afloat in terms of SCHs and getting graduate students jobs and things, they're not seeing any reward. It seems to always go to the individual. And I also think, again, this touches on something that you said, that the prima donnas, or the big publishers or whatever, I don't think they're that concerned with money. I don't think in academia, at least, there is a big divide between Ajaxes and Odysseus. They're interested in the honor as well. And part of the problem at the moment is not the fact that there's a differential in reward, but it's the degree of the differential that is annoying people. I think in academia, you don't need to give everybody an engineering professor's faculty to make them feel appreciated within their own department. And a lot of people do feel loyal and could be retained with less than an absolutely massive raise.
Yes, those are important points, Leslie. Thank you. I do think that the workhorse that what one of our regions called the Sherpas of the academic world do benefit from the prima donnas because they get better graduate students. If the department ranking goes up, we get better graduate students. We can hire better colleagues. So there are certain advantages quite apart from money, and we also bask to some extent in the glory. If you're in a top 10 department, you have some of the glow from that, even though you're not the person who lifted it up to that rank. But you're right. I think it is different in that way in academia. It's not about money. It is more about honor. But I think honor is not negligible in the business world either. You might be able to correct me on that. I think people care about the respect that they're given in organizations.
But can I just ask you to address the issue of the disparity?
Oh yes, disparity. I think there's plenty of evidence that people bear inequality very badly in every sphere. We don't like having inequality thrust in our faces. That is, unless we're on the top. Maybe we like it then. But there are many, many different kinds of studies that show the deleterious effect of gross inequality.
So how does age factor into this? You have a lot of young CEOs kind of leading organizations. What happens when Agamemnon is 30 years old?
So what happens when Ajax is 30 years old? When Agamemnon is 30 years old? Well, he needs to take my course. No, but that was a flippant answer. But I do think that experience counts for a lot, but if you don't have time for experience, then you need to talk to other people who do have experience and read. But I think that a 30-year-old CEO who spends time listening to his or her employees is going to become pretty wise pretty quickly, whether he reads my book or not. I recommend the book, but I don't think you need it. If you pay attention to your employees and their morale, you can probably figure out a way of living with this problem. If somebody tries to sell you a solution to the problem, you should know that that's snake oil. Right? Now, this is the kind of problem you need to learn to live with. If somebody gives you a set of bullet points that are going to solve it, don't trust them. We're human, and that doesn't work. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mimi Drumright from the School of Advertising and Public Relations. Paul, you made the argument that it's harder to achieve true justice in big organizations with algorithms that maybe don't work well. Given that you've worked so long in a big organization, how does a leader bring about the kind of justice you're talking about in a big organization despite the algorithms that might work against it?
Well, this is a famous problem. Mimi asks, how in a large organization that gives algorithms defining a system of rewards and promotions, how do you actually make the organization work well? And I'm not an expert, I'm not a management scholar, but my impression is that organizations find a way around the rules if they're going to be successful. Or they keep messing, or they're not very successful. But for example, in California, the university system in California has a transparent system of steps for raises. If you're at a certain step, you get a certain salary. Well, it turns out that if you want to retain people, you have to take into consideration the different kinds of expense that are involved in living in California, a very expensive state. And so there is money given to faculty quite outside the step system. They figured out a way to get around it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to keep the stars that they keep. It looks as if, I'm going to get in trouble here. So, Johnny will save me. It looks as if the law school figured out a way to give raises outside the usual system using that foundation and the forgivable loans. Is that it? The interesting example to study would be the American National Civil Service, which has a very rigid system of steps, I believe, which has not been entirely successful. People keep trying to monkey with it because it doesn't always produce the right results. How it works in large companies, I don't know as well. But I talk to, I have friends in the world of finance, and in a small organization such as Warburg Pincus, they have a reward system that is very flexible and geared to the individual. In a great big organization like Goldman Sachs, I think they have algorithms. And I don't know, you would know better than I, who wins between the Goliath in the finance world. Who gets the more brilliant people and is less likely to fall on his face through some error. But you guys, I know a lot of people here who know a lot more about business than I do.
Thanks for your thoughts.
Now you're in trouble because a management professor just stepped up. No. Say Cooper Meese, Management Department. My question is, what if Ulysses is incompetent? Right, so in the example you gave us, and I believe it wholeheartedly, Ulysses had higher replacement value. The problem is, organizations are awful at figuring this stuff out ahead of time, right? And so I'll give you an example. You know, I study the advertising industry, and I've looked at kind of this replacement value question. And when I go in and ask people, who are the most valuable people, who are the trendsetters, it's the creatives, right? They're the ones that are the highest paid, they're the Don Drapers. And then when I take a huge amount of data, I look over a long period of time, I find they make very little difference when they leave. Despite all the money they make, despite all that happens, the firms are not worse off losing the Don Drapers. But when they lose their internal people, the people who kind of are the Ajaxes perhaps, or the ones that know where all the bodies are buried, know how everything works, huge issues, right? So it's actually, kind of paradoxically, easier to replace a Ulysses sometimes than it is an Ajax. So if you know that that's a doubt and there's a chance that replacement value is unknown ahead of time, how does that impact kind of what you're talking about?
Oh, well, I think that's very real, and I'm sure you know better than I do what the studies show about investing in the future ideas of people who were supposed to be brilliant. In the academic world, it's not always a success, certainly, and I'm sure it's not always a success in the business world. Part of the dilemma was that with Ajax, you're paying him for what he has done and is doing, whereas with Odysseus, you're paying him for something he might do in the future. So it's a speculative investment, and I guess you have to think of it the way you would think about putting money into a startup or some other speculative venture. And that, so I suppose, depending on how conservative you are with your money, you might let Odysseus go and keep paying your Ajaxes as well as you can to keep them happy. I agree with you. Whatever you do, you've got to keep the Ajaxes happy because the business is not going to work well without them. I think that's a major component in the difficulty of this kind of decision. But do you think that, for the reasons you give, you would, as a manager, just let the headhunters have a field day with your people?
I guess I'm kind of an empiricist. I would question the replacement value of Ulysses.
Yeah.
Now, if I knew the end of the story, then I wouldn't. I'd give Ulysses whatever we wanted. Right?
You can't know the end of the story.
Yeah. But you know, it's I think time and time again, people put large amounts betting, like as you said, speculatively. And the problem is, it's, you know, if you ask me how much of your money would you invest in an IPO versus in an index funds, I'd say like 15% in one and 80 in the safe, and that's how I think Agamemnon should go. It seems like he put 70% in an IPO and 30% in the index fund, right? And so, in thinking about that in gradations, maybe it's a little, the risk is maybe swung too far in one direction. In general, I think the thought process with the Ajax investment.
I think I agree. And the cost and morale to investing heavily in Ulysses is very high. That has to be considered.
I'm just going to stand up tall here, camp in.
Sorry about that.
I'm Mary Ellen Isaacs, and I'm from the UT Dana Center. I run an outreach program that engages about 100 AmeriCorps members, mostly in their 20s. And my question is about some of the age issues. most of our current AmeriCorps members have grown up in an age in which everyone gets a blue ribbon on the soccer team. Everyone is rewarded, equal is a big deal. And I'm sure in your Plan 2 work, you've worked with a lot of youth and so, or young adults. And so as you look at that and think about that group entering the workplace, I think they don't quite understand, many of them, the value of being an Ajax before you're an Odysseus, and are in a big hurry to be seen as an Odysseus.
Yeah.
And many of them will be, they're phenomenal. So do you have any advice about, or any insights into your own work with young adults and thinking about the best way to help them see this other than just learning in life? I mean, we have an expression in our program, fair isn't always equal. And I find myself saying that a couple times a year. I think we try to be compassionate leaders. But I'm just curious if you have any question about that, kind of playing off the generational question.
That's very interesting. I haven't thought very much about that, but you're probably right that Odysseus ought to get out there on the field and take risks with Ajax, and in fact he does. And perhaps as a young man, before he gets the experience that allows him to be quite so guileful and dodgy, that he has to perform as an Ajax and do the hard work and show up every day and be loyal and all the rest of it. I think that what we do in terms of education is probably of some value along these lines, because we expect our students, whether they're honor students or not, to do quite a lot of work. And we reward them for the work. They don't get blue ribbons in my classes unless they've done the work. So I'm looking for bright ideas, but I'm also looking for people who are willing to bear down and get things done. I think that's a very interesting point. I'll think more about that. Maybe that a typical career has a trajectory which involves some Ajax and some Odysseus. I don't know.
If I can just add a point, there's a book called Hard America, Soft America by Michael Barone.
Michael Barone, Hard America, Soft America, talks about that?
Yes, because his observation was at 16, everybody gets all blue ribbons.
Yeah.
You go to Google
Yeah.
or anywhere.
Yeah.
By 30, they're the most competitive, aggressive people on earth.
Yeah.
That was his conclusion, that people, once they get out on the job market, discover a different world.
Yeah.
Change.
Right. Well, it may be that the academic world is more compassionate than it ought to be, giving out too many blue ribbons, and not recognizing, not preparing people for the competitiveness of the real world.
This will be the last question.
Oh, okay.
Dale Watson from the Provost Office. Dr. Woodruff, you talked about a new Agamemnon being trustworthy, building a culture, and communicating. But where is the Agamemnon that develops Ajax so that he becomes an Odysseus or increases his value to the team?
Well, that's you. I know that. And I wish I'd thought of that, or thought of putting it that way. Certainly a leader develops leadership in other people. And an Agamemnon might look to develop the Odysseus qualities in Ajax, which he has, actually. And this is, I think, a really interesting part of the story. I want to dwell on this for just a moment, if I can have 2 more minutes. In the play that Sophocles wrote about Ajax, Ajax turns out to have a gift for words when he actually needs them. The point is, Ajax has been a brilliant success all his life, simply on the matter of size, strength, loyalty, and bravery. He's never had to be clever. Nobody's ever asked him to use words, and nobody has ever put him in a position from which he could not extricate himself without guile. And in this play, there he is in such a position, and lo and behold, he finds the words. And I think what this brilliant playwright is telling us is, don't judge Ajax by his size or by his past. There's a potential for something which he's never had to realize. And given the chance, Ajax could be an Odysseus. And your Del's Agamemnon would give Ajax the chance to be an Odysseus. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.